There we go. We're live. Welcome back, Cetonauts. This is actually the first live stream from my new home here in Dubai. So welcome back, everybody. And today I have a very interesting guest because I'm joined by Spade, who is working at Neutron, and Neutron is the very first atom secured consumer chain that is about to go live. Today is actually the last day of the proposal 187 on the Cosmos Hub, and it looks like it goes through. So replicated security, which is the shared security model of the Cosmos Hub, is coming. And yeah, today we'll learn everything about what Neutron is, what's their kind of go-to-market strategy, also maybe what are some of the applications, and also most importantly, I think for all of you guys, what's the economic incentive model, right, for the Atom community. So without further ado, Spade, thank you so much for joining. Looks like you're in some tropical place. How are you? How is everything?
I'm doing good, yeah, thank you. I live in Thailand, so hence the, I don't know how to call it, type of rooftop. I hope the sound is going to be all right. Apologies for that, otherwise.
No, I think it's all right. I think it's all right.
Nice intro.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks for the kind intro.
Looks all right. Yeah, I think we can get right into it. This is a bit of an unusual time for me to do live streams. I still have to figure out the time. So, but everybody that's listening, share the link so people can join. There will also be a little AMA segment in the end, so you can ask questions directly. But my first question is actually, with replicated security now coming to the hub, the upgrade is happening on March 15th. How ready are you guys? Is the code ready? What phase are you currently in, and how do you feel?
Yeah, so overall feeling really good actually. We were looking forward to the replicated security prop on the hub. We expected it to be successful, but I think we didn't expect like how well received it was. It was a bit of a landslide, which is awesome. We're working pretty hard on bringing our own prop to the forum. The main reason, well, actually the prop has been ready for a while now. The main reason why we haven't posted it yet is because, in both the technical and legal setup, we're trying to make sure that, our team can over time just become one more core team, and that the network can have multiple over time, and that these can interact kind of like on the same equal footing essentially. And so one of the parts of this is to make sure that the foundation is really kind of like the one thing that's pushing the network forward. And so we wanted the prop to be posted by the foundation itself, and it took a bit longer than we expected to incorporate it, but actually the foundation itself actually was incorporated today. So fortunately, hopefully we should get the prop on the forums in the next few days. At which point, there'll be a lot of information for people to munch on, to to get up to speed on Neutron, what the value prop for the hub is, and all that sort of stuff. Now, in terms of like the project's readiness, as you're probably aware, we implemented, tested, ran on testnet, and audited all of the core modules. So basically, the whole blockchain is ready and has been ready since December, January, basically. It was audited one time by Oak Security before. What we're working on right now is, because replicated security was a bit came a bit later than we planned, we basically built our own roadmap around the roadmap that Informal put out with replicated security, which was supposed to be on the hub in January this year. And so we kind of made our roadmap based on this. Since we had a bit more time, what we did is we actually implemented a few additional features. We refined the governance system a bit more. We created smart contracts for the decentralized launch of the network, which I don't know how much I can tell you about right now, but it will be part of the proposal, so we can probably at least touch from a high level overview on this. And then a few other features, like, for example, if you ever looked into Osmosis's code base, you probably know about like IBC hooks, which is basically a module that allows transfers over IBC to trigger functions in smart contracts. And so we adapted this for Neutron, which is going to be useful for axelar, squid, and other protocols to integrate with it. Yeah. So we developed more features basically thanks to the extra time. But I think we've kind of like always focused on security quite a bit. We emphasize on getting audited the first time. We're being audited the second time by informal systems for the whole like code base. And so these new features also need to be audited. And so our timeline is basically built around when we think we can get the final report from informal. As soon as we get this and that we have a high degree of certainty that the code base is free from defect, then we'll publish the launch proposal. Most likely that's going to be in the first days of of April, which means that the chain, assuming that governance votes for it, the chain should be like mid-April, basically.
Mid-April, okay. So you mentioned the proposal that you guys are about to put up, which is ready already. Can you explain a little bit more, like especially for people that might not be familiar with how replicated security is going to work? Like, what is that proposal all about? And maybe what are some of the key features that will stand out? I mean, I don't think anything is public about this yet, but whatever you can share would be cool to get a glimpse of what's coming.
Well, I mean, the way the proposal on replicated security works is public. So basically, when you're making a proposal to launch as a consumer chain on the Cosmos Hub, you have to do a few things. First, you have to explain to the Cosmos Hub community what your project is, what it does, why it's interesting to have that as a chain from a general point of view, but also how it's going to work with the hub and how potentially it's going to participate in the hub's economic zone. And you have to propose what we call a security agreement. That's because essentially the way replicated security works is you have the provider chain, the Cosmos Hub, that effectively leases its validator set and stake to another project, the consumer chain. And that consumer chain benefits from a higher degree of security from day one. It doesn't have to bootstrap its own validator set. So there's a few strong advantages of using the technology, in exchange for which there needs to be some form of payment, right? Now, we're very early in that technology. And so there's no template for what a security agreement should look like and for what metrics should be used in order to evaluate various projects. And so, we're kind of like either pioneers or guinea pigs, depending on how you want to see it, in that we're actually participating to refine these templates and these processes. But basically, in the launch prop, like in our prop, what you can expect is information about the security agreement that we're proposing, information about the project, information about its roadmap, and technical information about what kind of like versions of the various softwares Neutron uses, how the validators are expected to take the binary, start running it and stuff like this, like a lot of technical information. Although that will be at the very bottom. If you're interested in this, you won't have to read it. And I guess what makes it interesting in Neutron's case is that because of Prop 72, there's already kind of an agreement between the hub and Neutron, right? And the agreement that was struck via Prop 72 was that Neutron would share 25% of its transaction fees. So we built the model around that, basically. But basically, from a general point of view, things that will be useful to everyone in evaluating consumer chain projects in the future is that there are basically 3 levers that you can use in order to accrue value to the hub. And those are the fees, right? So that can be transaction fees or any other types of fees. For example, Osmosis doesn't really have a minimum fee, but it has trading fees, and that's where the revenue of the chain comes from. So a chain that works like Osmosis could use, a revenue share on the transaction fees instead, for example. MEV is another one, which will be part of our proposal. So if you recapture MEV, you may want to share this, and it makes a lot of sense because the validators are involved in the recapture of MEV. They're the one who are actually proposing the blocks. So that's the first lever, like revenue share. The second one is token allocation, so actually giving part of the supply to the hub, its community, its validators, or there's various flavors of that. And it can be in one time or it can be over time. There's also various flavors of this, and it will depend on like the project's economics. The point is that it should make sense within the, for both sides basically. And the last element is also, how is this project going to drive demand, strengthen the narrative for Atom, right? Because what's actually curious about the replicated security economic model is that the most effective mechanism to drive values to the hub is to support the price of Atom, because it has such a large market cap that even a small percentage change actually makes it so that the validators and delegators actually get a ton more money out of it. And so I think like in the long term, we should be aiming for projects that are going to be successful and large enough in scope that they can support themselves based on fees themselves. That being said, in the short term, it's a bit unrealistic to think that transaction fees are going to cover every validator's expense 100%, because it takes time for projects to actually ramp up in the number of transactions that are being done and that kind of stuff. And so it takes time to drive adoption basically. And so there are kind of like other mechanisms that can be used. The other last element, which I think is kind of interesting to have in mind, is the validator and delegators actually don't have the same risk reward profile basically. If you're a validator, onboarding a new chain means something very direct to you, which is that you're going to have a server to run a node, and that node you will have to maintain. You will have to make some updates sometimes. You will have to check some communications channel to make sure that you're up to date and that you're not missing blocks, that kind of stuff, right? So you have some work to do, and you will need some hardware as well. So there's a cost to that. Onboarding a chain to replicated security, depending on how you run your validator, may cost you from $100 to $600 on average. It's like we could definitely use better research on how much it costs to run a validator for the Cosmos Hub, and especially in that context of replicated security. Unfortunately, we don't have very deep research in this yet. So we're using like market-based analysis, like where we asked a lot of validators what their cost models were, and we made an average based on this basically. So the realistic average is around 200 to 400, but keep in mind that some validators run their nodes for like $40 per month, and others spend thousands because they're doing a lot more, for example, labor around them. So yeah, if you're a validator, you have a cost associated with launching a new chain, and then you have the revenue that you're going to get, right? So the transaction fees, the token allocation, the Atom appreciation, all of this can drive value to you basically. And so you have to make kind of like a cost to revenue, cost to reward kind of analysis. In terms of risk, you have additional risk because you could technically be slashed for double signing, or you could be jailed for 10 minutes for missing blocks. Although the important thing to note here, both for delegators and validators, is that the latest update to replicated security, which is available on the forum, actually softened these requirements a lot. So for example, if you double sign on a consumer chain, you won't get slashed automatically like you would on the hub. For you to be slashed, there will need to be a specific type of proposal on the hub, and the hub community will have to vote that, yes, okay, I can see the proof. This is correct. This is not the consumer chain being malicious and trying to slash the validators. This is actually that the validators made a mistake or acted maliciously in some cases, but that is very rare. But like you will have the proof, and then from there on you can vote that like yes, they should be sanctioned because they may misperform. So the risk there is quite low. In practice, it doesn't happen often, and if it does happen, the consumer chain can't slash you directly. They will have we will have to make a proposal on the Cosmos Hub, and then there's jailing. So if you miss blocks on any Cosmos chain, after a while the chain is like, you're not doing your job, so I'm going to prevent you from having rewards for 10 minutes. That's still going to be the case on consumer chain, but I think the delay, like how much you actually need to miss blocks, is actually longer. So it will be harder for you to have that sanction. So the risk is low. There is a cost, but the risk is low. So for validators, like actually weighing in the benefits and the costs is kind of like the main topic in replicated securities economic model, basically. Now for delegators, the picture is very different. For delegators, you have absolutely zero cost, like, having a new consumer chain will cost you zero infrastructure, zero time. You just vote on the proposal and then it happens. Other people do it for you. So zero cost. The risk is also very low because yes, you do have jailing, so potentially missing rewards if your validator is not performing, but it's really difficult to trigger that. They really need to be doing a shit job, at which point you probably should just be delegating to another validator. And you can't get slashed without a proposal being accepted on the hub. So you will have a say in whether or not you get slashed. So the risk is very low. There's no cost. So anything you get from a consumer chain is basically free. So from a delegator's perspective, replicated security is definitely very, very appealing. There's very little reasons why you wouldn't want a reasonably good project to be launched. For validators, it's a bit more complex. You would have to vet the project a little bit more to make sure that it actually makes sense for you to essentially invest your time and money and infrastructure in running this chain, because you know that it has a strong chance of being successful. Yeah, so overall, I think the right approach here is, we want the technologies roll out to be successful. Replicated security, if it is to become a strong feature of the Cosmos Hub, needs to have a good story for its go-to-market. There need to be at least a few projects that are like, high potential projects that launch on it. And it's even more important that these projects are high quality because it has a cost for the validators. And so we should take that into account and not put undue pressure on them, basically.
By the way, I see Li Tang in the chat, absolute legend. He's always doing great recaps of my interviews, so looking forward to that one as well. Follow him on Twitter.
Awesome.
For sure.
Thanks, sir.
I wanted to get back on, and I think it's very important what you explained. You explained a lot of important things, but the overhead for validators, right? And replicated security is called replicated because the entire Atom validator set has to basically double their infrastructure, right? They have to set up a new server, they have costs, they have extra labor costs. Some validators even might have to hire another person, right? We also just hired another person because with ICS or replicated security going live, many other chains in Cosmos, like we need more people to stem that. With this in mind, you mentioned it's hard to project cost, obviously, but let's say around ballpark number, like let's just say with replicated security, there's going to be an additional cost for the validator set of $1 million a year. So how does Neutron cover these costs? What are your projections? And would you say, I don't know if you can release any clear numbers or plans or ideas, but what's the game plan to cover that and maybe even to generate an additional profit for validators, which obviously makes it very appealing. And I think that's the spiral that you mentioned that would also cause more buy pressure for Atom because that makes it a more interesting asset, right? A crypto asset. So yeah, what can you share precisely about the economic incentive model for Neutron and how you want to cover these costs at least?
Yeah, well, so there's two things. First, technically, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but technically the validators don't even need to break even or make any sort of revenue for the additional revenue from consumer chain to drive the price of Atom, because it's just a question of like financial modelization. If you have higher APR, then the cash flow that this asset produces is higher, and therefore it's more valuable, which has kind of like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because if you have a higher valuation for the asset, then people who are validating actually make more money because the asset that they get as a reward is more valuable. So that's kind of like the first thing. Now, in terms of like Neutron's case, Neutron is kind of fortunate. Like as a project, it's in a good position because it has all of the elements where it can help, make a really good deal for the hub, basically. The first one is that transaction fees in Cosmos aren't particularly high, like compared to Ethereum and other chains, which is a great thing from a user's perspective. But it also can like cast this shadow of like, oh, is it going to be profitable? We think that Neutron can generate like millions of dollars of transaction fees per year with moderate fees, as long as it's like successful, like it should be. On top of which, we're kind of like we're working to recapture MEV in protocol as well. So that's an additional revenue stream that we are going to be proposing to share with the hub. So it's not just transaction fees, it's also like the value of the blocks themselves, which is going to generate revenue. So the more volume, the more value there is on Neutron, the more opportunities for extracting MEV will be available, and therefore the more revenue the blockchain auction will generate. So there's these two components, and what's really interesting about them is that they scale. Sorry, they scale both with adoption in the number of users and the number of transactions, but as well as with kind of like the size, right? And that makes a lot of sense from Neutron's perspective, because as kind of like the small contract for, sorry, as the small contract platform for Cosmos, for the Cosmos Hub, there's, it serves as a center of gravity for a lot of infrastructure projects, for example. Like there's been this trend in Cosmos currently where a lot of projects, a lot of chains want to work together, but it's actually really hard in practice to align incentives because you have very strong trust assumptions, basically. Like, let's say, for Neutron and the hub, to make a token swap makes a lot of sense. For Neutron, it has the benefits of giving Neutron early liquidity, and for the hub, it provides exposure to Neutron at basically the best price early on, so that whatever the appreciation of the asset is, that all goes to the hub essentially. So the token swap makes a lot of sense, but in practice today, it's really hard to do. You would have to set up a multi-sig or a set of small contracts, and then you would essentially trust that either that this multi-sig is going to behave according to the terms that were set. If you're going to set a small contract, then you have less trust, but you still need to make a small contract and to connect the institution accounts and everything for one transaction, basically. Whereas in the future, some of the primitives that are being built on Neutron will actually enable these kind of operations to be done trustlessly, but in a much more convenient way, where you don't have to whip out an entire developer team to make a dedicated smart contract for these things to happen. And so these primitives will allow, for example, token swap to be made in a much more streamlined way, where for example on Neutron we vote to do this token swap. There's a confirmation proposal on the hub. The hub says, okay, we agree as well. And then both chains just trigger a transaction that sends the asset to kind of like an escrow or covenant contract. And that contract, when it receives both, once it verifies that both sides have been received, then it just triggers what both sides kind of like decided to do, like whether it's just keep them and ensure that there's a vesting schedule, or to deposit them in liquidity, or to stake them, that kind of stuff. So to go back to the main topic, how does Neutron generate revenue generate value for the hub? Like the first thing is fees. So in Neutron's case, that's transaction fees and MEV. The second mechanism is token allocations. For this, we have well accepted mechanisms that we will be using, and one kind of like more novel mechanism being the token swap. So it won't be part of the proposal. We'll mention it in the proposal because we think it's a really good idea to do eventually. But as I mentioned, like the technology is not really there, and we'd rather avoid relying on a multi-sig for such large amounts of money. Like a large amount of the Ethereum token as well as the corresponding value of Atom. It's a very large sum of money, so we'd rather avoid having to rely on a multi-sig for 3 years, basically. So probably we will propose this more officially when the infrastructure to do this in a trustless way has been created. So these are like two ways that we can allocate tokens to the hub. And then there's the kind of like last element, which is Atom appreciation, right? The thing is, Neutron as a DeFi-oriented smart contract platform, and because it's launching on replicated security, basically has a very, very strong interest and a very strong position to basically be building a marketplace for Atom to be used in a variety of DeFi services, right? So, there's liquid staking, there's like providing liquidity, but there's also stuff like, borrowing against collateral that is Atom denominated, or, liquid staked Atom denominated, having more complex financial tools like, bond stripping, where you can have, when you can basically choose to have a position on the yield that Atom generates, like the rewards that Atom generates, or the value of Atom itself, its price. And then you can kind of like take a loan against your, like by basically selling your yield to buy more principal, and then at maturity you get the tokens back. Well, I mean, so there's a bunch of like very interesting, sometimes complex, but very interesting financial primitives that will be built on Neutron, or that will integrate with Neutron, and all of this will drive demand and utility to Atom. So that's the first element, and the second element is that because of because of what I mentioned about like infrastructure and treasury management tools, there's a very strong chance that Neutron will be providing this like set of tools that don't exist currently, but that would be required for treasuries to be able to actually manage themselves and their the assets that they hold and all of this in a much more expressive and a much more dynamic fashion. Meaning that whatever protocol you have as a community, you may want to have some of your treasury being denominated in Atom or in another asset, right? And so by providing all these tools, Neutron will enable Atom to actually play this role in Cosmos, which I think a lot of projects have been meaning to do for a long time, but just didn't have the tools to do. So what that means is that you could have the largest buyers of all the institutions of Cosmos, essentially, like the projects, the community pools, buying Atom to hold it or even to stake it via these tools, thanks to Neutron. And so all of this obviously creates demand, it reduces the sell pressure, and all of that contributes to sustaining the price. The other element as well is that a successful launch of Neutron is a confirmation that, hey, replicated security works, the go-to-market of replicated security is going well. That's something that's going to drive revenue to the hub over the long term. So all of this is really bullish for Atom, basically.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. That makes a lot of sense. And I think I also want to hear your thoughts on Noble, because they initially wanted to launch as a consumer chain, and now they're kind of like, I think they first want to observe how you guys do and then maybe come back later. But what about the Neutron token? Because you're also going to launch here with the NTRN token. Is there any sort of emission split with the Atom community, or how is that going to be rolled out? You mentioned the token swap, but what other ways, and how is the emissions going to work for NTRN, and what's the utility and all these kind of things?
Yeah. So to get into more detail, I guess like we have to first like look from a very high level overview of like how things are done and what makes what work, right? Basically, our team developed the software that Neutron will use to run and to allow other applications to run. But because the hub is actually the entity that will decide whether or not the project should be launched and launch it, the hub actually and its communities and its validators actually have the power to make changes to the binary before it decides to launch it, right? So what we will propose is a code that runs, that has been audited, that is as secure and as well made as we possibly can, and then the hub basically has the power to decide what happens. Now the code that we will propose has components that includes like tokenomics, right? We cannot guarantee that these will be run as we will submit them by the validators. It's likely that it will, but it's we just can't guarantee it because we're not the ones to actually launch it, to actually run it. And so if changes are made, that's entirely possible. So now that being said, the way we designed the code is the Neutron token is a bit different from most other tokens in Cosmos because of replicated security, it doesn't participate directly in the security of the platform. And this is actually a bug, not a feature. This is actually a feature, not a bug, in that it allows us in designing the token to focus 100% on the value accrual. Do you hear the water right now?
No, it's all right. It's all right. I don't hear anything.
Awesome. So they just turned off the cool. So it allows us to focus the design of the token entirely on like traditionally, a token needs to do two things, right? It needs to make an incentives game that keeps the chain secure by making sure that the validators are compensated, they remain honest, and it's more profitable for them to honestly produce blocks than to go malicious, for example, or to not do anything. And then the second part of a tokenomic is usually to create incentives, like an incentive system in the zone's economy so that economy flourishes over time. in our case, we don't have to care about the security part, so we can focus entirely on the economy part. And so as a result of this, the Neutron token will have 0 inflation. So there won't be any inflation share with the hub because there's no inflation, basically. But there are other methods, like the hub is actually, like the transaction fees. So there's no inflation. All of the tokens exist at Genesis. They're allocated already mostly to the governance of the Neutron platform. Some of them are, distributed early on by various mechanisms. And basically, the entire governance architecture is designed to enable the allocation of these tokens in the best places. So, have an efficient grants program, have the ability to design well-made incentives program, all that kind of stuff. It's designed to support this very well because you can plug in either, sub-DAOs, multi-sigs, or whatever you want, or you can plug in, small contracts like pieces of code that will handle this according to a set number of rules. And then, so that's the input of tokens into circulation. And then in terms of output, you basically have the transaction fees in MEV that are collecting tokens from the circulating supply and that are handling them. These tokens can be Atom, USDC, or NTRN at launch. In the future, we plan on proposing software that would allow us to expand the range of tokens that can be used. That's made for a very simple reason, which is that it's just more convenient to not have to care about the token that you're paying it. So it's better UX. But to be able to do so, we need to be able to handle these fees in a bit more sophisticated manner than Neutron will be able to initially, because it requires liquidity and stuff like this. And so basically what happens is that these 3 transaction fee assets, Atom, USDC, and NTRN, can be used to pay for transaction fees. 25% of them go to the hub. That's the first thing that happens. And then from the rest, which is not sent to the hub, that is either sent to the Neutron treasury or it's burnt if it's NTRN tokens. So, there's a disinflationary monetary policy for Neutron as the new tokens are being, as the tokens that were in governance are being released in the economy, but they're also taken out by the transaction fees. And eventually it's fairly deflationary. And so as a result of this, Neutron stakers won't get, there's no Neutron stakers basically. So, no one gets NTRN tokens just distributed to them. So there's much less sell pressure there. To get the tokens, you have to earn them basically or buy them. But the hub stakers is the only group of people who are actually going to receive a stream of NTRN tokens because of replicated security. The other mechanism that we'll propose, which, I know everybody has been talking about or fairly excited about and stuff, is once again, as I mentioned, we can't guarantee what version of the code will be run and exactly what features it will have. Sorry, I'm getting attacked by a pigeon. But one of the versions of the code that we will propose will contain a Genesis state that allocates a portion of the supply of the Neutron tokens to the delegators and validators of the Cosmos Hub and potentially to voters of the Cosmos Hub. There's all of these calculations have already been made, and so if that version of the code is selected by the hub to be run, then there is no way to change the distribution currently because all the calculations have already been made from snapshots that are historic. But if that version is selected, then it will include what people usually refer to as an airdrop. There's another mechanism that's possible, which is called continuous airdrops. But basically what it does is exactly the same thing as an airdrop, except instead of giving it in one day, it gives it over time through staking rewards. In our opinion, it's probably, if you don't have inflation and that's not a continuous thing, it probably doesn't really make sense because what people will end up receiving is just dust. Sure, they'll keep receiving it forever, but it will be dust. And so in our sense, it made more sense to give people a solid, to distribute voting power more efficiently and make sure that people could participate in governance because they have this incentives alignment. They're part from the hub community. Now they're also part of the Neutron community basically, and they have voting power to decide what happens with the platform basically.
Okay, so just to be clear, because you described the potential airdrop, but what exactly does that depend on? does that have to go through community governance as well, or how does that work?
It mainly depends on one thing. So when we make the proposal, we will attach files that are the binary, so like the code that runs the blockchain, and we'll attach a genesis state, right? That genesis state gives you, like in layman's terms, that genesis state tells you what is the state at block 0, basically. You know, what this, you can imagine it as like, imagine the blockchain existed before, what happened before, and so that genesis state, one of the versions that we'll propose contains allocations of tokens to wallets that correspond to atom delegators and stakers, right? So the only thing that the hub needs to do for this to happen is to take this code, verify it, you know, make sure that it's safe and before it starts running it, and to then vote to launch it, and then launch it, basically. So there's no additional proposals to be made. It's just a replicated security proposal for Neutron. If you decide to launch it, then that is one of the things that will be part of the genesis state, basically.
Okay, but that already concludes or includes the 25% transaction fee for the Atom community.
That's a completely different. So that's a completely different mechanism, right? The initial allocation is more like an airdrop, right? It's, you log into your wallet that is attached, that has the same private seed as, like, private key as your Cosmos Hub wallet, and you see that, oh, you have Ethereum tokens because you're a staker on the now the transaction fee split is a different thing. It's a module in the blockchain that collects the transaction fees over time and redistribute them according to some logic. In our distribution module, because of replicated security, there's some code that says, hey, before you do anything with the fees, first send 25% to the Cosmos Hub, right? So like those two mechanisms can exist in parallel, basically.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the dApp landscape. I got this question a lot. Since Neutron is a permissionless smart contract platform, Cosmos wasn't enabled. What are some of the dApps that, I don't know if you guys are building them in-house, or do you have teams that are building dApps on top of Neutron? What do you think is going to be the kind of killer application for Neutron?
I think there's a few, basically. So basically, like, the whole point of Neutron is, well, I guess there's kind of like two types of killer dApps, and we kind of touched upon this already, basically. But the first one is, like, there's a bunch, like Cosmos currently doesn't have a lot of DeFi going on. You know, we have various projects that are providing DeFi services, but we haven't seen an explosion of DeFi services like on Ethereum and other platforms, right? Neutron intends to make sure that that happens, and yeah, so like DeFi is definitely going to be a big one, and you can think about this as not only DEXs, money markets, and others, but ones that are actually cross-chain, meaning that you don't even need to care about which blockchain you're interacting with in order to be able to use their services, basically. And wherever you are, they'll have mechanisms that at least try to give you the best service possible by taking advantage of the cross-chain infrastructure and the fact that they have information from, you know, all of these blockchains to be able to give you the best execution possible. For DEXs, that means, you know, DEXs that have basically the same pool of liquidity for multiple chains and that can move that liquidity around to service trade better. For money markets, that means stuff like being able to, you know, deposit collateral on one chain, take a loan on another chain, deploy that into a yield optimizer or an automated strategy on X chain, right? The other one is, like, you know, that there's going to be liquid staking and kind of like fixed rate borrowing and all of these sort of stuff, right? So most of these projects we are not building in-house because, you know, that's kind of like not the point. The point is to provide tools for everybody to be able to build their applications more easily, faster, more securely, and be more successful, basically, because they have access to the feature sets of all platforms in Cosmos and the markets of all platforms in Cosmos. That being said, we're probably going to be providing some technical support to a few teams, including we are, like, I mean, it's difficult to give names at this point because most of these discussions need to be confirmed by governance eventually, right? And so it's kind of like, I don't want to use their brand without the consent of the actual decision maker, which is their governance layer. But there's a large public funding project in Ethereum that's interested in deploying on Neutron to provide quadratic funding to any chain, any project in Cosmos. There's we're building like liquid staking that will be associated with one of the largest, the largest liquid staking provider in the industry, provided that the DAO votes to confirm this. So yeah, application-wise, I don't think it will be too much of a problem. I think Neutron is going to be a fairly interesting. That's good to read. Thank you, sirs. Thank you, guys. We're doing our best to make it very exciting. Now, the other kind of like vertical where I think Neutron is going to be very interesting is that, kind of like some of the vision around like governance and kind of like inter-protocol like interactions and trades and flows of value that Atom 2.0 had was rejected by the hub, right? Because it contains steps that were not acceptable to the community, and that's completely fine. But some of the mechanisms, some of the technology that were depicted there is actually getting built by various teams on Neutron. So you can expect like very pretty good DAO tooling on Neutron. You can expect which would allow projects across any chain. So even if they're not launched on Neutron, they can use that infrastructure by interested accounts to create and manage their DAOs and their treasury on Neutron, for example. So creating the DAO, managing the DAO, and then the treasury, right? Entering agreements between DAOs and between treasuries. Let's say, like two chains want to do a token swap, well, we'll have the tool to do that. All of that kind of stuff. And so as a result of this, you have an ecosystem that's likely to be really interesting for, users like you and me, who can, access DeFi from here and to access it like across Cosmos. Something that will change the way that we experience Cosmos as well, because currently, there's a lot of like bridging back and forth involved in using the various services in Cosmos. With Neutron, it's very easy to make simple small contracts that essentially do the bridging for you, so that you can access all of the services without having to constantly change the chain and do IBC transfers and stuff. You can just say like, hey, here's what I want to do, and then it does it for you. So that's kind of like for the retail users, and then for larger players like the DAOs themselves, the institutions, we'll have the tool that allows them to access like services all across Cosmos as well. And so as a result of this, there's likely to be fairly significant flows that go through Neutron as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very true, a lot of the things that you say. I do think, however, though, at the same time, the community right now has very high expectations, right? This is like the most highly anticipated feature that's coming to the Cosmos Hub, basically since the hub launched, I guess. Because up until now, I think the Cosmos Hub's value proposition and killer application has been very unclear or vague. But now with replicated security going live, I think there's a clear use case. So everybody is like, I understand your approach, but I think still everybody is very much anticipating and has very, very high expectations. So just to be clear, like when you guys launch on day one, you said earlier, probably end of April is kind of the rough timeline after this month of governance stuff. From day one, will there be
a bit earlier than months of April, most likely? Oh yeah. So I mean, when the chain actually launches, like once again, some of the software that we include in the binary and that we will be proposing to launch, and once again, that may be removed or not, some of that software will include what we call a launch event, which is at about like a period of about 10 days when the Neutron token is not really available in circulation because the allocations are made to small contracts and stuff. You will be able to see if you have an allocation of tokens from the Genesis state, but that allocation won't be available right away, and that's because we will be making sure that the voting power is correctly distributed by enabling anybody who wants to participate in Neutron to get exposure to it, basically. And so we're planning that launch event with multiple phases. The first one will be the airdrop, so you'll be able to like see if you got the airdrop, claim it. It won't be liquid right away, but you will be able to see that. And then you would then have what we call the liquid auction, which is a novel mechanism. as far as I know, nobody made that kind of stuff before, but it basically has two objectives, which is one, to make sure that people who are interested in Neutron can have voting power in its DAO, and two, to make sure that the kind of like the DeFi ecosystem on Neutron has the liquidity that's required to bootstrap these first use cases. So like that launch event will partially be held on a DEX. So like the DEX itself will be live from day one. As far as I know, other existing projects in Cosmos like Osmosis and others are looking to deploy Outposts on Neutron as well. So that will go live at estimate as far as I know, very soon after launch as well. And then there's a bunch of projects that are launching on Neutron itself, kind of like as their first launch, that will go live in the next kind of like few weeks and months. We're basically working with them right now to try and make some kind of a roadmap for when everybody launches, basically. Some of the integrations will be available like at launch. We're working with Axelar and Squid to potentially to try and make sure that they support the launch event itself, so that even if you have tokens on, let's say, Avalanche, and you want to participate in Neutron's launch event, you can just like zap from Avalanche into the launch event directly, and then back and forth, obviously. So like these integrations, the wallets, the explorers, all of this will be available at launch, and then for the actual dApps, they will launch over time within the next few weeks and months. We don't basically, given the market circumstances, we thought that it makes more sense for us to have a stage launch where every 2 weeks or something like this, there's a new thing to try out and to use, than to try and do like a big bang where it's like, oh wow, 2 weeks of it's awesome, there's so many things to do, and then afterwards there's no excitement anymore because you've seen most of the apps, and that's it basically. So things will be coming in over time. You can expect the DEXs very early on. The automated strategies and the DAO management toolings should go fairly soon afterwards. NFTs should connect fairly quickly as well. And then later on in the year, the liquid staking protocol will be released, and a few other kind of like more ambitious features that need more development will be released as well. So that would include like the treasury management stuff, the quadratic funding. Yeah.
Sounds like Neutron is going to be the liquidity powerhouse on the Cosmos Hub. And honestly, I think it's also much needed, because right now a lot of the liquidity in Cosmos is like centralized basically on Osmosis. And I think Osmosis is amazing. I think we all love Osmosis, but it's time for serious competition. And I think that's also a net positive for Cosmos, also for Osmosis themselves. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Like, and then before we get into some of the community questions, like, what is?
I mean, if I can just like touch upon this like very quickly, I completely agree. I think like the model that we have for liquidity needs to be changed, and it needs to take into account the fact that Cosmos is crushing by definition way more, because the current way we've been approaching it is very similar to other ecosystems, right? And as a result of this, we have very shallow pools of liquidity that are scattered all across the place. And Osmosis is kind of like the exception to the rule, right? Osmosis has liquidity. Osmosis is an awesome product, but for other DeFi projects, that hasn't worked out like very, very well. So what we'll be working on as well is to kind of like change the way we approach liquidity by rather than having each protocol kind of like have to fight against other protocols for the liquidity, we'd rather try and build a system that allows all of the liquidity to be concentrated and then reallocated across the protocols as they need, and so that it's way more transparent for from the user's perspective. What they get is they have the highest utilization ratio as possible, because their liquidity is used as much as possible, so they make more rewards. And then from the protocol's perspective, what that allows you to do is to have way more certainty over the degree of liquidity that you can have, and have way more certainty over how much you're going to actually spend to get that degree of liquidity. So I think it's actually plus EV. And in terms of like Osmosis itself, there's actually a lot of like cooperation and a lot of like integrations that can be made, and that will make like both ecosystems like better, basically. Like some of the like Osmosis is transitioning to an active liquidity model where they use something to the flavor of Uniswap v3, right? And that means that they will require either market makers or very savvy DeFi participants that are constantly adjusting their positions and stuff. And that's not for everybody, right? And so there are projects that function more as like AMM, so like passive liquidity. You just provide the assets and then the pools do the rest. And these projects are actually very well placed to develop strategies to provide liquidity to Osmosis afterwards, but do so in a way that's more active, that has a better strategy, so that they would be able to make way more profitable positions than users would be able to. And so, even on the topic of liquidity, there's actually fairly significant opportunities for collaborations.
What is your views and maybe even collaborations that you might have with other potential consumer chains? I mean, it's pretty clear. I think everybody's excited for you guys to launch. Last time I talked to the Noble team, they were planning on becoming one of the first ones as well. Then they opted out a little bit. I think they want to launch with a proof of authority chain first, and then maybe migrate and adopt replicated security later. There's names like Duality, Stride is obviously coming, right, which is also a liquid staking protocol that's already in existence. Comdex is exploring it. So what are some of the other teams that, I don't know, you guys are talking to, and like specifically about Noble? What do you know? What their stage is, and how have you been talking with them, collaborating with them, or how does that work?
Yeah, for sure. So we're as kind of like one of the early pioneers of replicated security from the consumer chain perspective. We wanted to be close to the other projects that are going to be launching, so that we can share information and make sure that the rollout works as best as possible for everyone. So yeah, we're in close communications with all of these projects. For Noble, it's unfortunate, but it's also understandable. I think the situation in a nutshell is just that replicated security is a new technology. It's a very political technology, like anything in Cosmos, basically. And so as a result of this, like, concessions have to be made in order for that technology to be acceptable for anyone in the Cosmos community, and to make sure that the technology actually can roll out. And some of these changes were kind of like last minute, like the slashing updates, which can like make it way less likely that a misbehaving validator would be slashed. And so, for us, we knew from the start that we would be, pioneering, kind of like being guinea pigs for this technology to an extent, and that there would be complexities on the economic side, on the technological side, on the political side, all of it. And we kind of, once Prop 72 passed, we were like, okay, we got the support from the Cosmos Hub community. We know there will be challenges. We're just going to stick through it and just make it. But in Noble's case, it's a bit trickier, right? Because they're working with Circle, and Circle is this big monolithic centralized entity that exists on like numerous ecosystems, and so they have very different ways of going about this, right? They have very strict kind of like either policies or criteria that they're looking forward, and so the changes to the slashing updates were a bit of a difficult bite to swallow for them, and so that's kind of like what prompted the change, as far as I know. Now, what I take from this is that it's not really endorsement, or rather like lack of thereof of replicated security. It doesn't really say anything about the technology. It just means that like they got scared by the fact that changes were made. So yeah, hopefully they'll join the replicated security set eventually. In any case, like just having Noble launch is it's tremendously plus EV for the ecosystem, and we're looking forward to integrating with them as soon as possible. So that's kind of like my point on Noble. It's like, it's fortunate, but it happens. Hopefully that'll be fixed. Hopefully they'll get back into the active set of the consumer chains like eventually, but we'll see. I don't want to speak for them, basically, so that's kind of like the thing. And then for other consumer chain projects, I think basically there's like two categories of projects. There's ones that are either already live or are very, very close to product. And these have basically very strong teams. Like, I think, Stride and Duality are two projects that I think are fairly exciting. I'm really excited to see Stride transition, because it's kind of like, like they already have it set, right? They already have validators. They already have IBC connections. And so you have both technical and political complexity of migrating to consumer security. And so in a way, they are also pioneering or being guinea pigs of another onboarding to replicated security, right? They're demonstrating that, like, whether or not it's possible to actually transition to replicated security. So that's a very interesting experiment that I think is worth following. Duality, I think, is, their DEX and what they're doing to MEV is fairly innovative. I think they have a lot of potential as a team to do a really, really good product. We have close relationships. I think they're a great team. So I'm looking forward to see them, go live with their decks and everything else that they've been built. And then there's other projects that are perhaps like a little bit more distant in terms of like their launch timeline. The concepts of what they're working on is very interesting. And so I'm looking forward to them continuing the work and shipping their products eventually. I think in any case, like it's good to go slowly with replicated security and perhaps not try to launch like 100 chains on replicated security this year, because, as I said, like there's going to be adjustments needed on the technological side, on the political side. The validators need to get into practicing replicated security. And ideally, we want to be able to have the time to also make, significant improvements to the cost of running nodes for replicated security, and that may be possible. So, if we can secure these over time, then it just makes onboarding later way more easily, way less controversial, and way more profitable for everyone, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you guys are definitely going to be a good you're going to be a good template and an example for potentially the next wave of consumer chains or chains that want to explore it, and then Stride for existing chains, which I think is also very interesting. If you look at Comdex, they already showed interest. I think Crescent, Gravity Bridge, like all these projects that also have potentially high TVL relative to their market cap. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. So I think I want to capture also that Noble, I think they just route back a little bit, but I think they're not completely out, right? Like I talked to Jihan last week, and they're still in the test net. They're still exploring it. I think they just want to see how you guys go to market, how the economic incentive proposal is going to be received, how governance works, how slashing works, if the product, if the code is secure and reliable, all these type of things, right? So I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like it's, it participates to this thing of, this is a new technology that is fairly ambitious, and we need to demonstrate that it works in practice, right? And there's a bunch of things that are involved here. There's like political elements to like the votes and stuff. There's economical elements to the sustainability of the set and the revenue that's produced, extra. And then there's technological stuff as well, like how we handle slashing, how we protect the hub from malicious consumer chains, if that's even a thing. In the case that they try to slash the hub for nothing, that kind of stuff, right? And so basically, that's why we emphasize the fact that like successfully rolling out replicated security is very important, because that's exactly what the Circle example demonstrates. Basically, like they're large non-Cosmos funds, and so what they care about is to make sure that it's going to go well, basically. And if we want large partners like this to be able to approach replicated security as a very attractive proposition, then we need to demonstrate that it runs smoothly, and we're, whatever the challenges were initially, we were able to fix them, and then we have a template for how these things should work, and we can do it like reliably, professionally, basically.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think, however, with the news of Noble, and for those that don't know, Noble is the chain on which USDC will be natively issued. But with that news, I think some cosmonauts got a little bit scared, right? Crypto is very emotional. Everybody, based on one news, they get very emotional. So they're like, what if Neutron is next? What if Neutron drops out? What if they're not really committed? So maybe...
Yeah, you know what, actually, I just had a second thought. We've been working on this for like 8 months. You know what? Let's change it completely. We'll be an Avalanche subnet instead.
There we go. There we go. We broke the news. Avalanche
Just kidding.
subnet
No, so like what when it comes to Neutron, like there's no need for alarm. Basically, as I mentioned before, we've received the support and the funding from the Cosmos Hub community via Prop 72. Interchain security was something that was part of our design when we made it in the first place. That's something that like we think that in the case of Neutron, it makes perfect sense for us to have that very close relationship with the hub. We know that it's a new technology and that there will probably be challenges, but we're willing to stick with them. So, if the Cosmos Hub community wants to have us, then Neutron will be a thing on replicated security. So yeah, like I don't think there's any need for alarm about this.
Yeah, let me just read you one little thread here that was made by Litbit, and then Effort Capital jumped in. I don't know if you've seen it, but Litbit was basically saying, if the hub becomes so reliant on Neutron for CosmWasm, what is stopping them from becoming independent after it feels it has leveraged the hub enough? And then Effort Capital responded, the hub's long-term value prop is not ICS for app chains. Neutron and others are already looking at developing a role app once Celestia is mature. The hub is a blank slate with good token distribution, minimal complexity, and high market cap. Being a CosmWasm chain is not the answer. What are your comments and thoughts on that?
Well, so I guess like we are indeed working on making rollups for Neutron to scale the platform. That doesn't mean that we are leaving the Cosmos Hub, because like the consensus of the L1 itself and the security of the L1 itself is still handled by the hub. So like I don't see them as kind of like competitive on the contrary. Now, one thing that may be interesting for us to do with Celestia is actually to build another platform that will essentially connect to Neutron. Like, do you remember Evmos?
Yes, Evmos, yeah.
Yeah, so the way it worked is you had evmos, and then you had a settlement rollup on Celestia, right? And the two were connected, and Evmos used the same, well, the settlement rollup used the same token, right? So that may be a model that's interesting, and that would also therefore generate value for the hub, because the transaction fees that the hub would get would be, more valuable, basically. Now, the thing is, like, we are looking at ways where we can do something similar, but without having to fragment the liquidity, the user base, the applications that will exist on the Neutron L1. We don't want to, like, if we can avoid it, we'd like to avoid duplicating the chains and the settlement layers. We'd like to have something that's more integrated. And so, for example, what that could look like, and this is very early research and development stuff. So like, no one is saying that this will happen, and no one is saying that this should happen. But one of the things that could be possible is, for example, for Neutron to use Celestia as DA, as data availability, because that's what Celestia specializes for, and then use Interchain security to have a decentralized, censorship-resistant validator set with a high degree of proof-of-stake security, then combine the two, and then build the rollups on top, and potentially use the Celestia for DA for the rollups as well. And what that means is that, like, it would be basically be part of both ecosystems, even though, especially since like Celestia is kind of like part of the Cosmos ecosystem, I guess it's a micro ecosystem of its own. But so yeah, I really don't see them as like opposed, right?
I mean, I also think like it will really show, like you mentioned earlier, and I haven't really thought too much about it, but of course, if the atom price goes up, right, it even makes more sense and makes more of a case for replicated security, right? Because the security budget will increase, which means the consumer chains are more secure as well. So I think if that's a given,
there's another cool thing in this, like another thing that people tend to oppose is Interchain security and mesh security. I actually don't think that they're competing technologies. I think they're complementary technologies in that, like you can even do fairly funky stuff. Like, Neutron doesn't have its own validator set; it's secured by the Cosmos Hub. But Neutron can still provide security to other chains via mesh security. That's a great tool in terms of like making kind of like partnerships and alliances and stuff, right? We could deploy Treasury and TRN into mesh security smart contracts, therefore providing economic security to these chains, right? But an even funkier mechanism would be Neutron could provide security to the Cosmos hub, meaning that Neutron and the Cosmos hub could enable mesh security. Neutron would then deploy its own assets to mesh security, therefore minting synthetic atom that would be staked with the Cosmos hub, right? And that stake would contribute to the overall economic security of the Cosmos hub. But because that security is replicated to Neutron, that also means that Neutron is participating to making itself more secure and all of the other consumer chains more secure in the same way, because that security is replicated to every chain, basically. So they're actually pretty cool.
Frank is impressed. Frank is impressed. You know it all. Nice. We actually wanted to keep this a short one, like 30, 40 minutes
Just
before we
LARPing,
started.
sorry.
No, we're already above an hour. I think we could go 2 hours more. Maybe let's look into some of the questions.
Let's have like 5 or 10 minutes of questions and answers. I just realized that I have a call afterwards, so I'll have to drop, but we can definitely do 5 to 10 minutes of questions and answers.
I don't exactly
time
understand
flies when we're having fun.
What steps or
measures
measures
in place to dissuade stakers receiving Neutron tokens from just exchanging to other coins? As Neutron is the first chain offering ICS, it advertises ICS to future coins tokens. I'm not sure about the second part. I'll answer to the first one. When you're in the future, if the hub decides to launch Neutron and decides to launch the binary that we included, and so therefore it works the way that I think it's going to work, when you receive your staking rewards, some of this will be MTRM, some of this will be Atom, some of this will be USDC, most likely, right? What you do with those coins is entirely your responsibility. So Neutron doesn't do anything, Neutron doesn't control you and what you do with your tokens. That being said, we're working on making Neutron as a token as attractive as possible and as useful as possible, so that once you get those tokens, it's appealing for you to use them to participate in DeFi on Neutron, and in doing so, get voting power so that you can also participate to the government on Neutron. Now, is Neutron advertising ICS to future coins and tokens? Not really, but what we're doing is by demonstrating how the technology works and that it can be successful, well, hopefully, we're creating an example, like a case study that other projects may use in the future to decide whether or not to launch on ICS. So, yeah, the better it goes, I guess, the better.
Yeah.
When will that? Day one. So that's one of the core features of Neutron. It's actually already been audited. It's been present on all of our testnets. So it's fairly battle tested at this point. In fact, there's another project called Nolus, which is using our tech basically for their interchain accounts as well. And so we have now 2 teams contributing to making it the best implementation possible. So,
which team is that?
Available on Nolus.
Nolus. Okay.
Nice. Yeah.
Nice.
They're cool guys. Check them out.
Yeah. I know them. We're probably gonna have them on the channel soon as well. Master Toki, is Lido being deployed on this chain even though there is an SEC crackdown? And what is Neutron's use case?
Well, so I'm not qualified to give any legal opinion here, so I don't really know. What I can tell you is simply that for an implementation of Lido to be deployed on a chain, it has to be ratified by governance, right? The Lido governance needs to say, yes, we're in favor of this being launched, right? In the case of Neutron, there has not been a vote to confirm this yet. That being said, we're very close to the Lido DAO. I think there's a lot of excitement in the DAO about this being the case. The thing is, for this prop to be made and to be passed, we want to present a strong case for why that makes sense, basically. And so the things that contribute to making a strong case is to first have a protocol that's already built, that's ready to deploy, and have a market, right? So it's a very different question if we go to the DAO and say, hey, do you agree to launch this protocol on the chain that isn't live, has 0 TVL because it isn't live, has 0 applications because it isn't live, and take a bet on the fact that in the future this will be successful? It's a very different question to say this, or to go to them with, hey, look, this is the TVL of the chain, this is the growth trajectory, this is the implementation, it's already ready. Please, we've already audited it, please review it.
see that it's like secure, that it's scalable, that it's a great implementation, look at the value of the market in Cosmos, like the stake on the various blockchains, and yeah, like, do you want to take this business opportunity basically? So it's a very different kind of question. That's why there hasn't been definitive action on this, because we need the assent of the DAO, which is a very, it's a typical thing. Like basically all of the protocols that are looking to launch on Neutron currently will need to make proposals to their own DAOs and their own governance. And so that's why, like, announcing stuff is always a bit tricky, because we usually need to wait for the proposals to be ratified, basically. And now in terms of the Neutron's use case, the question is, like, is it the chain or the token? Because they're very different, I guess.
I guess saying Neutron, I don't know. I think we talked about it, actually. Like, we talked a lot about it. So I think Master Toki just rewatched.
Yeah, so in a nutshell about the token, basically, the Neutron token is a bit unique. And well, so if you know superfluid staking, this will be similar to you. But basically, Neutron tokens can be deployed in governance and still get voting power. So, deployed in DeFi and still get voting power. So that's kind of like one of the things that we developed, which is that, for example, if you want to provide liquidity on Neutron, you can deposit, let's say, a TRN atom into a liquidity pool, and that LP token or that deposit to that liquidity pool you can use to get voting power and then participate in governance. In the future, we will use the token. Well, at least in the future, we are hoping to develop software that will allow selecting sequencers for the rollups, by basically allowing sequencers to compete for that opportunity by either staking these tokens or other mechanisms. The token will also be used in to provide security via mesh security, assuming that the DAO votes to make this possible when mesh security becomes available. And it also essentially, it allows you to participate in the decision making for how the chain should be managed and how how its economy should be grown using the treasury funds. So it has political power, basically. So those are a few of the things.
Yeah, very interesting. And Master Toki, I hope that helps. If you want to learn more about the use cases, we talked about it like in the first third of the stream extensively. So, or second third, I don't know. I don't remember. We've been talking for so long now. But I don't know. Is there anything else from your side? I was just going through the questions, but I think we covered most of it. Anything else from your side that people might misunderstand about Neutron, or that might think this is not going to work, or what do you think, like, people really underestimate about Neutron and you guys going live next month?
That's a really good question. I mean, so I guess it's like slightly off topic, but I think the main challenge for Neutron as it launched is going to be that there are two sources of complexity. The first one is that Neutron as a product is mostly appealing to developers, right? Because what users will care about is what's on top of Neutron, right? So the governance, but also the applications and stuff like this, right? But that's a very small part of Neutron, right? The Neutron product, where the features and the value is actually mostly catered to developers. It's about making developers' lives way better by making it easier, cheaper, more scalable, more secure to build crushing applications in Cosmos, right? And so as a result of this, we focused a lot on like technical explainers and stuff like this. I think that was important. I think that was good. But I think as a result of this, like we probably kind of like bored a lot of the people in the community, and so they didn't really dig deep into what Neutron is and why it's awesome. So that's one thing where we can definitely do a better job. I think the immediate complexity for Neutron and the immediate kind of challenge is going to be the launch event and stuff like this. We've designed custom mechanisms to really optimize for what matters for Neutron's success. And as a result of this, these mechanisms are kind of like new, right? They're new, they're slightly complex. And so we're looking forward to releasing a lot of like information about how they actually work, so that people can make the best decisions on how to approach them. But I think in general would be really useful for us is two things. The first thing is it's always better to work on something when you have feedback from the people who are interested in it or are looking to use it. And so if you're a developer or a user and you're interested in Neutron, either conceptually or other way, like just join our Discord, join our Telegram, whatever suits you best, and provide that feedback, right? It's always interesting for us because sometimes you may have thought about something from an angle that we didn't approach, and so it may be kind of like a source of a breakthrough solution for us. The second thing is like if there are things that are really unclear to you, and like just flag this, because most of the time we already have written about the subject and we'll just like share the resources and provide additional explanation if necessary. But sometimes we may just not have covered this yet. And so if that's the case, then flagging it helps us make sure that we cover these in time. It takes time to write good content, so we probably don't do it in the same day as you flagged it, but over time it will help us just make sure that we're providing the information that's adequate to everybody, basically.
One last thing before I let you go. CosmWasm itself, there has been some discussions recently, right, about funding, public goods, Confio, all these type of things. Since you guys are implementing it, is there any collaborations with Confio going on, or what are your thoughts on this whole public funding and CosmWasm funding, development funding type of stuff? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, basically, we use CosmWasm. We think CosmWasm is awesome. And we think that it should continue to be developed and probably deserves to have more resources allocated to it so that it can become a very competitive virtual machine in Web3, not just the default option in Cosmos. I think it has tremendous potential and it should be developed. So it should have the resources to develop. Now, for the funding itself, I think the main issue that we're seeing in Cosmos is that there's not really a framework for how these things should be approached. I think that's where we can improve. I'm very glad to see that the hub is supporting Confio. I think that's a good move. What could be useful is for that funding to be go to contributing, like to support consumer chains, not just Neutron, but like any consumer chain that uses CosmWasm. That could be useful to make the hub more, attractive. In terms of Neutron, we are our team is definitely in favor of supporting Confio, and we will be pushing a proposal when Neutron is live for Neutron to participate in funding Confio to make sure that they have the bandwidth. We're doing other stuff like we'll be attending CosmWasm, and we see them as really, really good partners. We want to be helpful to them. With their work, they're providing tremendous value to the ecosystem, so that should definitely continue to work. And I think it's especially crucial when there's reliance of so many chains on that part of the stack, and making sure that Cosmos SDK upgrades and determinism and stuff like this, all of this is aligned to the stack so that we can have the highest security, the most up-to-date software, the latest features rolling out in a smooth and timely fashion is actually really important for the success of a lot of chains in Cosmos. So yeah, definitely supporting Confio is important. I'm glad that it's happening. I'm not too concerned about I know people have been crying against the double spend. I don't have strong opinions on the matter. I don't think it's going to be wasted money. I trust Confio to use that money to develop the software like it should be. And yeah, that's basically my points on this.
Nice. So quick summary of what we talked now for 1 hour and 20 minutes. Proposal 187 brings replicated security. It's currently at 58% voter turnout. The proposal ends today, actually, and we're at 99.99% for yes. So as it seems right now, it's going to go through. The upgrade and implementation of replicated security is then going to go down on March 15, which is in 8 days. Neutron is ready. You guys have your code ready. Security audits have been done. And your proposal is then coming up.
We are waiting for one thing. We are waiting for, we've already had an audit but we made more features, and so we're auditing them as well. And that's why we're not planning to launch like next week, basically, because we're waiting for the final reports from these audits as well to make sure that the entire code has been covered by an audit. So that will take some time in March. But as soon as that's ready, we'll be posting the proposal to launch Neutron on chain, basically.
So that's still planned to go down this month in March, and then
well, it depends on the auditing, honestly. What I think is most likely is we'll probably get the final audit report with any potential finding being bug fixed by the end of the month, and then we are planning to launch the actual vote. So the proposal will be on the forum way before that, but the actual vote is probably going to start in the first days of April. It would be my guess. The reason for pushing it back by a few weeks is that it allows us to make sure that we already have the audit finished before we put the proposal on chain, so that we don't have any bad surprises in the process, and we don't have to ask validators to change the binaries or anything like this. So that the code that's attached to the proposal is the code that we'll actually launch, which is important for people to be able to review it and make sure that it's up to standards, I guess.
Nice. Cool. I think we're all very excited. Alex would keep his airdrop Neutron if there would be any. So yeah, thank you so much. I think we're all pumped. We're all excited. Yeah, I think to follow and stay up to date, I guess follow Neutron_org on Twitter. I'm actually going to drop that profile here in the chat so people can follow right away. And yeah, is there any other place where people should go if they want to learn more and stay updated?
Yeah, so our Twitter is basically where we put all of the important updates. If you want to get the updates before other people, we usually tend to put them on Telegram and Discord a little bit before. So that's where the alpha is. So those are good places to join if you're interested in keeping in touch closely with Neutron. That's also where you can ask questions and get help. And then otherwise, we have our website. We're looking to expand that fairly soon. Because the website is good, but it's kind of an MVP currently. We're working on making it way more interesting, have way more resources about Neutron, how it's built, and all that kind of stuff. So that should be rolling out in the next few months. So at that point, that will be a really good place to get an overview of Neutron and this ecosystem and all of that.
Sounds good, man. Yeah, looking forward to do this again in 2-3 months when we cross the first billion TVL and Atom is at $100. Let's see.
You're bearish.
All the best. Looking
2-3
forward to
months. You're bearish.
Looking forward to the proposal. And yeah, thank you so much for being here, sharing all the insights.
Well, I mean, technically, most of what we discussed today is alpha. So, there you go.
There we go. That's why you should always be watching Cryptocito videos, Cryptocito live streams especially. I always, that's my mission, right? I try to squeeze out as much alpha as I can from all you guys. So yeah, thanks for sharing all that. And yeah, we'll keep track of everything and do this again. And hopefully sometime in 2-3 months. Let's see. Cheers.
Sounds good.
See you.
Cheers. Take care, everybody.